give you a little background of myself. When I was 5 years old, I was presented to the spiritual people of the community as a potential candidate for being one of the spiritual leaders of the community. So in a ceremony that was performed at that time, I was blessed and presented as a future spiritual leader for the community. Well, interestingly enough, these changing times kind of made changes, even of the best of intentions. My family moved away from the community, and even though all of the ceremonies and prayers for my becoming a spiritual leader for the community were made, the possibility of that, of course, was never going to come to fruition because of the physical situation in that my family no longer lived in that community. We had moved away. My parents had decided that times had changed. I needed, or the whole family, the whole community needed a new direction. They decided to move to Albuquerque, where I could get an education and I could become more of a political leader of sorts, or a person that would be more meaningful to the community in terms of how I could benefit them in a more physical capacity. So off we go to Albuquerque, and I wind up at the University of New Mexico studying what they had hoped was law, but turns out I turned into an electrical engineer, and I was an electrical engineer. But how I got involved in this is you cannot run away from the fates, especially if the fates have been sealed so strongly in ceremony and prayer. Those wishes and prayers and desires and intentions of those medicine people from long ago could not be made to go away simply by moving the family or my own physical presence away from the community. So all the time I was in college studying all the sciences and maths and all the things that are required to be an engineer, things were happening in my life that were just not normal. I could sense things in the architecture. I could hear voices from people's thoughts. I could touch things and determine who's been there, where they've been, all of these odd little phenomena that were just not normal things. Fortunately, because in a university environment, you meet with all sorts of people. There's people in there studying math and psychology and sociology and all of these things. I was fortunate enough to be able to have a large house instead of living in a dorm that a lot of people live in. One of the people that lived with me in the house was studying psychology. And in the course of his study, he came across, the professors, they touch on many, many subjects. They came across these books about shamans and shamanism. So he said, you know what, Patricio, I think I know what's happening in your life. There is this thing they called shamans and shamanism, and he gave me some books to read that were part of one of the courses in his class. And so I said, oh my God, this is my story. This is about me. I was reading about what happens to these people and their lives and the things that occur to them, and I recognize all of these symptoms. Now, of course, you got to remember that since the ceremonies that were done for my becoming a shaman were when I was age 5, and here I'm at 22 or so, and I'm getting this info, I did not connect immediately as to what the heck was going on. So I started pursuing shamanism as a side course or a personal study, not even knowing that actually I'd already been predetermined to be in this particular realm. So I pursued all sorts of avenues of spiritual endeavor. I started looking at comparative religion. I started looking at philosophy. I started looking at spirituality from many, many angles. One of the angles of spirituality which I endeavored to research was, of course, shamanism, because this was my introduction into it. Historically, though, shamanism, especially the type of shamanism that gets written about, is all about the shamans that come from the direction of psychotropic or psychedelic experiences. They all get their powers from taking either that particular medicine or from working with such and such plants or working from these and these experiences. So I was very, very steeped in that type of, of knowledge. And of course, you don't just read these things just for your own academic enjoyment. You actually want to test them. So I, whenever possible, within the capacity of a person living in New Mexico, I would attempt to recreate some of the experiences that I had read about and learned about in my researches. So I, of course, went through the process of taking peyote, doing the peyote ceremonies with the peyote priests. I, of course, did all the esoteric ones like the datura and all of these things, the mushrooms and all of them. All of these things from the context of trying to put them into perspective in my own life as a shaman. But in the course of this whole process, I also started to awaken memories within myself. In the process, I finally remembered the famous ceremony of when I was just a child, and I'm like, oh my God, you cannot, I've gone full circle. You cannot escape these things. They are, once they have been set into motion, and these prayers, they cannot be undone. I got here, even though the path was supposed to have been, as a young man, I was supposed to apprentice with one of the older shamans in the community, or maybe several of them, and I was supposed to learn from them all our traditions and all the appropriate parts of our specific form of knowledge. Well, of course, that got disrupted, but not really, because as it turns out, instead of being a shaman for a specific little group of people, I became a universal shaman.